Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the first webinar from the BDMA for 2021, setting goals and delivering them with agility. Thank you all for joining in, especially given the current rate of work that we see within our industries, the flooding that happened on Christmas Eve and consequently all the burst pipes and stuff that happened in Scotland and the north. So I appreciate your time. Hopefully we'll be able to give you an enjoyable session. I'd just like to start by introducing you to our panel, the four people who are sitting waiting to give us their expertise here. With headline speaker Kate Russell, former chief executive of the Pilgrims Hospices. She's got over 30 years experience in the pharmaceutical industry, and she's been focused a lot on delivering situations where I think rightly say that people are object to her being around, basically. So I think she's got a fantastic background in understanding the challenges we face and how to deliver them. Joining Kate, we've got Scott, Jody, and Damon. Jody is Managing Director and Employment Law Specialist. She's had her own business since 2018. Jody also looks after, she's chair of This Is Me Yorkshire. Not being from Yorkshire, I couldn't comment on that, but it's a business-led campaign focused around mental health and sharing people's experiences and how they can reach breakthrough. Scott Stewart, military background from Scott here, many years in the armed forces, then served as close protection. Scott's project manager at Saga Services, involved in data pricing and underwriting. So Scott has vast knowledge there and experience in delivering people. And then finally, Damon is the managing director of Bullerwell Independent Insurance Brokers, handling over 120 million pounds worth of premium income. So again, four speakers from very varying backgrounds. Are they related to what we do as an industry? Well, not directly, indirectly, a couple of them definitely, but it's their experience in delivering services in exceptional circumstances, which will very much be able to, I believe, benefit what we do as a living every single day of the week, having to deliver our service in trying times, with people who do want our help, and those that we've all seen them, people who don't want our help. So let's start. If you could save your questions till later, Paul Williamson from Realia is going to watch out for questions being raised, and then we're going to have a panel question and answer session at the end. So I'd like to introduce you straight away to Kate. I'm sure Kate will give us a better brief on her background than I've just done, and then when Kate's finished, we'll move on to the rest of the guys, and then we'll hopefully have this question and answer session at the end of the day. So over to you, Kate. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, John. And it's a delight to be meeting new people. In the one thing with COVID and having to stay home when you're a gregarious person is you suddenly have your wings clipped, and we've all been having to do a lot of adjustment, and who knew that we would be able to get together on Zoom. So thank you all very much for being part of this today. It gives me an opportunity to enjoy reaching out and talking with people. As John said, I'm the person that most of the time in my career, people have not wanted me to be around. I get why that would happen. I've been involved in mergers, acquisitions, and change management. And my original background was in the clinical world, and then went into the pharmaceutical industry. And to give examples of the kind of things that would mount as a crisis in my previous world, for example, I was sitting in Amsterdam where my head office was, and my mother came over for the weekend, which in itself was not a crisis. What then emerged was I had to be on the next flight out to Asia Pacific, because we had to do a £720 million product uplift of infant formula because somebody had spread a rumour that there was botulism in the infant formula. And while out there, I then had to go straight on to China because the Chinese government had started to arrest senior directors from various different pharmaceutical companies and organizations and accusing them of corruption. And my medical director in China was American, and I'd had notification from the American embassy that they were not prepared to negotiate with the Chinese. So I had to go out and represent the organization in China and hope I didn't get arrested. And in the meantime, my poor husband had been left in Amsterdam on his own with his mother-in-law, and therefore he had his own crisis to deal with. So I've always been involved in change management and in looking at how people operate when under pressure and how to get the best out of people. So you might be thinking, why would we even be worrying about planning and strategy when basically we're by the seat of the pants and this is unprecedented times? And I want to be able to share with some new ideas and some thinking that may help you realize that actually this kind of global crisis could be a real opportunity, but you have to get a balance between bringing a sense of normality to people and supporting a very natural need, and also taking advantage of the fact that there is so much disruption. Because to achieve change management, you do need people to be out of their comfort zone. So I think where we are, the majority of people are out of their comfort zone. So how would you capitalize and make the most of that? So it's to actually take a pause in the just getting through the day and think about what could be going on with the way people are thinking and behaving that could actually bring real benefit to your organization. So I'm just going to share my screen here so that you can follow me on a few ideas and concepts. Take a second to go into, there we go. So I think we're all agreed that we are in unprecedented times. But one of the things that Winston Churchill was really good at is getting people to come into the fray, to face up to it and start to really think and plan things in a different way, because that would allow us to use our energy. So I want to take a moment or two to just explore how the brain's working and what's actually going on. So in any day, we make on average 35,000 decisions. And this was before COVID. This is how the brain normally operates. We're making 35,000 decisions a day. And if you were conscious of all of that, you would probably go insane. So what we do as human beings is we have receptors in the brain which work on, if everything looks and feels as it should, then let's just crack on and do all these things that we need to do. But it's still scanning all the time to see if something new, unexpected, or threatening has happened. So in those 35,000 decisions, one example of this sort of behavior is when you learn to drive a car. When you're first learning to drive a car, you'll be very, very aware of just how much risk you're at and you're putting others at. And you'll constantly be trying to think of 100 things. And then one day, if all things are working as they should, the actual driving bit disappears. And you're concentrating on what it is you're doing and why you're driving to somewhere. So your mind is able to think about the meeting you're about to attend or the shopping you're about to do, but it isn't worrying about the mechanics of and driving. But when that cyclist suddenly comes out from nowhere, you can still suddenly go into a whole process of conscious management of the situation. So we make 35,000 decisions a day. 98% of them, we work on autopilot. And this is type 1 thinking. Now I'm giving you some sort of specific terms here, and I'll give you some references, because obviously it's a lot to take in today, but use chat. If you've got questions, if you pop them into chat, we'll try and scan them at the end. And if you use some of the references, you could do a bit of your own research into some of the information I'm sharing. So autopilot, fast, type 1 thinking. You would then have 2% of the day, which is this conscious effort, type 2 thinking. It's more methodical. You even know you're thinking when you're doing this bit. These are the references I'm talking about. And I believe that this is all going to be shared and recorded, so you don't have to rush to try and capture these now. There will be opportunity to get them later. But heuristic behavior is this patterning, and it's how human beings cope with so much happening all at the same time. You will form patterns and let it sink into your subconscious as quickly as you can. The fast, slow thinking concept, you can see the work by Daniel Kahneman, and we're also going to be talking about first principle thinking. That's the big stuff. That's about really type 2 thinking, where you're thinking strategy. So why am I mentioning any of these things? What's the point of it? Well, if we look at fast thinking, what's the advantages of this fast thinking? It allows you to make quick decisions, quick action. Because it's subconscious and it's not noisy, it keeps you sane. And it gets the job done. It gets you out of the parking space, gets you the journey, and gets you to where you need to go. And it can save lives. And I'm sure that we've got, Scotty will be talking a little bit about that. This is why a lot of military behavior is drummed in, so that when it kicks off, you're in a heuristic pattern and you automatically respond. And if you've been trained well, you will do the right things without really having a conscious moment. The downside of everybody being in this type of mindset is it's a knee-jerk response. Unconscious bias is a really key piece to this, because it's very prone to unconscious biases and limited horizons. And the downside of that when you've got people in business is, when you're trying to bring about change, people will be trying to stick to, but we don't do it like that here. This is how we do it. People try to control their environments. And if they haven't really had much of a horizon scan, and they're very narrow in their thinking and narrow in their experience, your people in your business will only be able to think within linear places. And that will actually lead to what we call functional fixedness. And that can lead to obsolescence. So if you're not being able to drive people to come out of automatic pilot, the chances are that at some point there is a risk that what you're offering to the market and what you're actually developing will freeze, because you've run out of steam, you've run out of thinking. So let's have a look what happens in type 2 thinking. This is deliberate thinking. This is strategy. This is slow thinking. It grows the business. It brings new ideas. It future-proofs, and it's less risky because you're not at the knee-jerk unconscious bias overlay. You're actually thinking, okay, we deliberately want to think in a different way here. And it's from the slow thinking and the being able to really consider what's possible that you can actually grow and future-proof the business. Limitations on this is it does take longer. It's not as intuitive, and it absolutely can be described as navel gazing. And if you have very action-oriented people in your organization, stepping back and taking a moment to really enter strategic thinking can actually be something that people feel is a waste of time. But the gift that it would bring, if you're all in a state of readiness, is some very intuitive new ideas. If you learn to harness both types of your potential, This is where the real benefit to an organization and a business can be. But on a day-to-day basis, we have to manage the expectations and the issues that will go on with people who are highly sensitized. So IQ, I often call that the thing that gets you the job. But EQ is what will help you succeed and grow during this time of crisis. I'm working at the moment with the NHS England, and we're working with the leaders in the NHS, because if we don't acknowledge the impact, and I'm sure you've seen it on the news, if you're not acknowledging the impact of what this unprecedented global situation has brought about, people can sink into a negative position, and it can cause long-term post-traumatic stress. There is a possibility for post-traumatic growth, but you have to plan for it. And one of the things I want to share with you now is some tips and techniques for how do you harness and benefit from crisis by using EQ techniques. So this is a quote by Dr. Miller, and he's one of the people that we've been working with on putting together a leadership program in the NHS. And I'm sure you're hearing a lot now about the need for mental health support in the NHS for their people. We cannot control the pandemic, but you do have choices about where you stand and how you feel about it and actions you can take. So this is why I'm very keen on the concept of emotional intelligence. And in change management over all the years, this has been, and these are the techniques that I've been using to get people to come together and to come with you on making change happen. Emotional intelligence is about using emotions effectively. You take data, and there's a lot of people who are in business who rely very heavily on data, information, reports, science, very heavily on fact. But human beings are structured and built with emotional capability and insight as well. And this is where that gut feeling you have when you know something isn't quite right, where does that come from? Well, as I said at the beginning, in the brain, you have receptors, and those receptors are scanning all the time, looking for danger and risk and thinking about, am I all right? Am I safe? Do I need to do anything? Do I like the cut of this person's jib? Do I feel that there's something undercurrent here that I'm missing? These are the things that lead to the actual production of chemicals. And as the chemicals are released, funnily enough, the chemicals that are produced that are stimulated by your brain scanners are produced in the gut. So this is where you get, or my gut feelings telling me that this is not right, or my gut is, I like this person. So the chemicals are produced in the gut, and then they flow up to the brain, and then your brain tries to make sense of what it's feeling. But when I first started in business, I was actually one of the very few women that was at my level in the pharmaceutical industry. It was a very male-orientated environment. And if I use the word feeling, if I got into emotional intelligence, it became, oh, there's that woman again. And well, we know that we've got to have one on the board, but actually, in change management, this is what set me apart, because connecting to people, and if you think about it, you've worked for an organization. I was with the Ciba-Geigy Sandoz merger into Novartis. I worked with Glaxo becoming GlaxoSmithKline. I worked with the team setting Boots Healthcare up for moving into Reckitt Benckiser. All these times, people's livelihoods, their future, how they're going to earn, the competition for places, made it that people were in crisis. And at the same time, the business need was to keep moving forward. So the sooner people came on board, the quicker we could achieve the outcomes that we needed. So EQ became the science for actually getting people to come with you in change. It enables us to be emotionally supportive, and more important, inclusive of others. There was a style of management for instructing and telling. Leaders tell people what to do. But actually, the more that you're able to connect to people and get them to think for themselves and come out of automatic pilot and contribute, the more brains that you have supporting the organization and supporting the future. So it's well worth to move out of telling into discussing, supportive, and move forward. EQ is not about being emotional. Someone who is emotional, I would say or suggest that they're actually beginning to lose a little bit of control because they have moved to a knee-jerk expression. Having emotional intelligence is about being able to hear, see, feel what's happening, and then choose a response. And the response is measured to what's going on around you. It doesn't mean you need to come across like Spock from Star Trek. If people are shouting and excited and there's tears and there's drama, and I have to say, when I was a chief exec in the hospice team, tears were part of every day. And how do you work with that? And people would say to me, how do you work in such an emotional environment? It's because we acknowledged that actually all emotions are normal and they need to be expressed. But how do you support and lead people so that there is an outcome and you actually move somewhere? And this is post-traumatic growth, rather than leaving them sitting in post-traumatic and developing stress. Stress comes when all those chemicals are pumping around and you're in fight, flight, or freeze mode with nowhere to go with it. That's when you're under stress. You can have fight and flight chemicals and take decisive action that leads to an outcome that all that adrenaline and all of those chemicals are then a positive impact on the body. You need them. Stress factors are positive. They only become negative when there's no outlet for them and people feel that they have no control over anything. So people need leaders in times of uncertainty. And this is often falling to people like yourselves where you're actually struggling yourself. There will be things going on in your life, things that are happening around you and your family, and you're needing to carry your team plus the people behind the scenes. And you may actually have levels of concern for yourselves and your family members that mean that everything else is in a context of a highly stressed situation. So what I thought I would do that might be helpful is to share some EQ support tips. So one of the things that we have identified, and this is something I'm sharing in the NHS thing, is the need for daily routines, the opening and closing of a shift or a day. Now that might sound obvious, and this is this bit of where we're going to talk about the obvious so that we become very conscious. We're in type 2 thinking, deliberate thinking. We're conscious of using some of these techniques to support people. So what does an open and close of the day mean? MS Teams, Zoom, these are great things, or even just the phone. Set it up that when you open the day, you're actually saying to people, how are we all? You're gathering people in and you're noting who's turned up, how do they look, are they suddenly quiet, are they participating? And at the end of the day, the shift, you do that moment of where you say, right, okay, everybody, we've all got there. Today's been a bit crazy. You're acknowledging the mood and the sentiment that people have had for the day. And you actually give them permission, and this might sound quite alien, but this is this leadership piece, by verbalizing things like, and you can imagine the end of a shift in an A&E department and in intensive care, if at the end of the shift you say to people, right folks, we've had a bit of a day, and you acknowledge 2 or 3 key things that were more disruptive than anything else, and you then program people, and this is the key to this EQ lark, you program people by saying at the end of the shift, but your time today is done. I need you all to go home and rest. And I need you to really take a few hours just for yourself and your family, and trust that the team here now will hold this together. We're going to pick this up and the next team will take this on. It's time for you to rest. That programming gives people permission to step away, to step down, because people who are in high stress situations often take on far more responsibility than you can imagine. And this is where planning comes in. And you would think, well, really, do we need to be looking at business objectives and planning? Isn't that just business speak? Isn't that just managers being managers? But actually, human beings, as I said, 35,000 decisions in a day. You need things to have a rhythm. You need things to be quiet and just happen. So it works if at the beginning of a shift or at the beginning of the week, you actually have achievable short-term goals, because you need people to feel that there is a rhythm, that there is something that we're going to do today or this week, and at the end of the week, we can say we got there. Because otherwise, the horizons are so far away and so intangible. When are we going to get this vaccine out there? When are we going to get everybody done? When will we be able to do X, Y, Z? And when things are that complex and that far away, people cannot see how they're going to get there. So a plan and short-term goals are actually more important in crisis than perhaps in the rest of the year. So using things like this face-to-face technology, you're looking for people who are zoned out, avoiding sessions. So when people are too busy to get onto Zoom or too busy to be on that call, have a conversation. Avoiding is often a way a human being will respond when in crisis. So if you suddenly started seeing that someone's behaving differently from what they would normally be doing, so if somebody suddenly become quite strident or quite loud, or actually doesn't care what's happening anymore, they would need an individual phone call, and it's worth making the time, because when all this is done, we're going to be relying on the same people in our organization for the next 5, 10, 15 years of business, and we can't have them broken. So taking the time for people is why I believe EQ is a critical skill set and a critical thing to be mindful of during crisis. When it talks about being mindful of the context, when you open a conversation with somebody, do people stuff. Jacinta, the Prime Minister of New Zealand, is really good at this kind of stuff. She doesn't start with, okay, how is the business going? When you talk about a short-term plan, are we talking about saying to people, did you get that phone call done? It's about people stuff first. How's today gone? Are the kids okay? what's happening for you. Here are some really good, simple, and this is something I really want to express, EQ's not complicated. What are you feeling? Now, the thing about asking that question is we're using the word what, not how are you feeling? What are you feeling? Because one of the key things about programming in the brain and the way the brain works is when those chemicals are released, they're released ahead of you being able to make sense of it. That only happens when your brain tries to run it through its conscious thinking. So you will have chemicals that will give you a sense of something, a sense of danger or a sense of risk. But if you can name how and what is happening, that makes sense of it for human beings. So language is very important for human beings. So it's well worth, what are you feeling? Anxious, indifferent. Because the minute they put a name to it, it's starting to tame it and starting to get control. The next one is, okay, so what options do you have? This is not for you to solution for them. This is for them to think, well, okay, rationally now, what are the things I can do? And by keeping it, what options do you have? You're empowering them. And the one thing about crisis and the one thing about people feeling threatened is they feel they have nothing of their own. They feel no means of controlling things. So asking them what options do you have forces them to start their rational brain thinking. And then, so that it's manageable again, and out of all of those options, can I ask what really matters right now? If we could only do one of those. And again, you're helping somebody move from chaos, too much, all that's going on in my head and I'm feeling I'm going to explode, to, okay, so what really matters right now? So if you haven't done a lot of EQ type thinking in the past, those 3 questions will get you a steady path. And don't fear what the answers will be. You're having a conversation with another human being. You can't get too deep and into too much trouble if you stick to just asking really normal questions and see it. The person in front of you is just trying to get through it and you could help. But the other thing I want to share with you is first principle thinking. Now there's going to be references to this, so it's well worth having a look and a think about this as well. And this is where, when there is a crisis or when there is change, you need people to come out of their routine thinking. You need people to break out of their, oh, well, that's the way I always do it. That's the way I think. I'm in first thinking. So I'm going to set you something to give an example of it. Elon Musk is fantastic at this. If you want to know what gets that man separate, whether you like him or not, it's this kind of thinking. So take a minute now. You've got a candle, 2 metal rings, and a set of matches. The task is you need those 2 rings to be joined together in a figure of 8, and you need it to be robust. It needs to hold together, strong bond. So those items, if you're taking a minute to think about what you would do to make that bond happen, often people will think in terms of those items being those items. It's a candle, there's matches. People may find themselves thinking, well, obviously something has to melt here. So if I light the candle, that would cause some wax. And oh yeah, well, wax might stick them together. And they get into that thinking. While people are in a disruptive state, if you were to take your strategy and do first principle thinking, you would actually start doing an audit of all of your assets and capabilities and stripping back to what is the actual essence of each piece. And you will find in there some really unusual answers. And it could be that during all of this crisis, if you had a strategic team got together to do a bit of first principle thinking around your long-term strategy, you may find that there will be things come out that you would never have been able to find if everybody was in automatic pilot. So the answer to this puzzle is stop seeing the candle as a candle. Because it's called a candle and there are matches available, you feel you need to apply that asset, that capability there is a candle. When in actual fact, it's a piece of string. The wick is a string. So just get the string out of the candle however you want. You don't necessarily need to use the matches at all. But if you took the string, you could tie the rings into a figure 8. But it's this thinking of assets and thinking of all of what your business has available to it, stripped back. And then what would we do and how would we apply ourselves? You can see that there's a huge creative well that you might not have had the thinking for when people thought business was just carrying on. So when the world stops and you're faced with all these chemicals and all this energy, could this be the time to do something completely different and spend a little bit of time doing strategic planning, but with first principle thinking? So in summary, crisis can be the best and worst in all of us. It's a disruptor. There are benefits to principle thinking. It gets people out of that's the way that we've always done it and allows them to see that the future could be completely different. It's only what it is now, but it could be anything in the future. Language and behavior is vital. Signals, messages, what are you giving out? Taking a moment to think about programming words and programming language could be the thing that makes the whole difference to how your team feels. Become outcome focused. What I mean by that is be sure to allow people to think and come across how they're going to solve problems in a creative way. So when doing those top and tail meetings, if the job's done, that's good enough. Pacing is important. This is a long haul. We've got some way to go. Take a breath, take some time off. Take yourself away from the situation for a moment. Using emotive language. Be sure to ask, how are you feeling? What are you feeling? And finally, I'm going to leave you with this very powerful little word called yet. I love this word. We don't have the vaccine yet. We have a vaccine, but I haven't got it in my arm yet. We're going to have to work through all of this and we don't have the resources yet. So just by being a leader and dropping that word at the end of a sentence, this is EQ, this is language programming. And I'm hoping it's been of some value to you today. So I'm going to stop my share and return us to the panel and hand over to John, and let's see whether or not there's anything coming up that you want to actually discuss. Thank you, John.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Kate. I was writing some notes down here and I said, does this explain my teenagers? Really?
Yes, because they are absolutely trying to fathom out what their automatic pilot's going to look like.
Well, their automatic pilot seems to be doing 5 things at once, but one are not listening to us. So fantastic. Thank you very much. We do have some questions. I think a few of them are related to all of you guys, so I will throw some in here. One of our attendees has said, well, just sending this while thinking of it, how do we ensure this philosophy transcends the whole organization? So I'll throw that one open to you initially, Kate, and see if you've got to.
Yeah, that is about culture. And this is where leadership comes in. If you start talking like this and you start behaving like this, people around you will pick that up and it becomes a viral change that happens throughout the organization. So there's very much it has to start somewhere. So picking off who are your key influencers, and your influencers might not be management. There may be someone in the organization that you know everybody loves. Get a small group together, express and share some of these ideas, and then get yourself 4 or 5, depending on the size of your organization, get yourself pockets of people who can do this, and it's simple to learn, and then you've started to actually infect the organization with EQ. That would be my way, but there are other ways of doing it as well.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Anybody else?
Yeah, I would say, I mean, kind of echoing really what Kate said in that leading by example. I think you've got to have the culture in order for it to work. If it's not authentic and it doesn't fit with the values and the culture of the organisation, then whatever you're trying to implement is not going to have the impact that you want. So I do think as leaders, we do have to lead by example. We can't tell people to do one thing and do another. So it's very much on us to set the scene and to set the tone in order for us to have the effect that we want. You're on mute, John.
There you see, technology. I hope that answers that question. I've got another one here then. So should we be open about this approach to our teams and managers so they could also appreciate the conscious effort to support them? Or will the theory confuse some?
Can I jump in there? Just say, I think if you're concerned about it confusing somebody, that comes down to what Kate's talking about in terms of that communication. I think you need to identify and understand the members of your team, their skills, their learning abilities, and just make sure that you're communicating that across to you. But the one thing I would say from experience is, always share. Always share the mission. Always share where you're looking to go. The best way of you achieving the objectives is if you get a complete buy-in from everybody within the team. You can't do that if you haven't actually shared where it is you're looking to get to in the first place.
Okay.
And I would also add, never underestimate. So when you share, some people may need a bit more time to absorb. Give them reference points, give them things to look at, TED Talks, things that they could read, or just be persistent and consistent in your approach. And let people come to it in their own time. But I totally agree with Damon. If you're not open and if you're not talking, avoid forms, and silence is the scariest thing to do to people, because they fill that gap, and they often fill it with things that are far scarier than anything you could think of.
I'd also like to add there, exactly on the back of what Kate's saying there, is from a military and close protection sort of background and working in quite thick and fast and adverse environments, is there are times where you need to make a real conscious effort to ensure that you bring everyone along on that really tough journey. And that could be a really tough 5 minutes of the bullets coming in, to the fact that you're on a really tough job with a tough client in the middle of Baghdad, Iraq, and making sure that everyone sort of shares the same visions, cultures and behaviours of you ensures that you bring everybody on that journey together. And of course, in a time like COVID that we're in now, then people will be up and down. But if you've all got the same experience and understanding of the direction you're going in, then it's a lot easier to bring some of the people that may be taking a little bit longer to understand where you're going. It makes it a lot easier for that transition.
Okay, fantastic. In these situations, is a more constantly changing strategy better than none? One of our viewers has asked.
It's better to do something than nothing, I always say. I think often we try to perfect what we're trying to do, and then we put it off because it's not perfect. But the reality is it's better to do something that's not perfect, but actually start that process. So I always say start small and start to affect change that way, rather than putting it off and waiting for a big grand plan, because it'll just never happen and there'll always be an excuse. So I know certainly as an owner-run business, that's something that's come up time and time again, and actually you've just got to hit the ground running and just get on with it. And actually, like the others have said, having people who have got the buy-in who can help you do that as well. So it's not necessarily that you have to bear all that burden, as it were, in terms of rolling it out. Actually looking at who can support you in your business and who can champion that for you, whatever type of change that it is.
So
I think from a rugby point of view, I used to say to all my players was that, make a decision, a bad decision, a good decision, but make a decision. No decision, we're just left there standing. And again, looking at that kind of sports background, you kind of play what's in front of you. So sometimes you are going to have to see a kind of change in strategy, because unfortunately the environment you live in is changing on a daily basis. So
I have to say, from my personal point of view, perspective, doing the job that I do as a field manager, I've always encouraged guys, when you turn up at somebody's house, do something rather than nothing. Have a positive impact when you've left. You've done something as much as you possibly can, even if you work till it goes dark, that kind of stuff. So, and
I would also say that there's a difference between strategy and plan. So it's a mindset thing. So the plan needs to change all the time. I'm sure Scotty will agree that you have great plans and it actually goes to what's it as soon as you're in contact. Yeah. But you had a plan, and it's a mindset thing of the strategy is where you're going long term. That's a clear vision of where you want to be. Yeah. And the plan will adapt and change and get people change accepting. The plan will change while we get there. But the strategy is clear, and you can see a vision of where the future is going to be and what that's going to look like. So it's sort of change ready, and accepting the plan will need to be adapted and have people who can cope with being able to think quickly on their feet.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I've just had a prompt from Paul. He's conscious of time where we are, and we want you guys to get in. Looking at my running order, I think we're on Scotty next. If my running order is correct,
yeah,
we're all right. So I'll hand over to Scott, and thank you very much.
Cheers. Thank you, John. So I want to follow up on a lot of what Kate has said around the type 1 and the type 2 thinking that is played quite a lot of my time in the military and in the close protection industry. And the type 1 thinking for me is sort of some of the foundations in enabling success that we talk about, setting goals and then delivering them with agility. And those are sort of the training, cultures and behaviours that have been sort of the bread and butter in the military. And as Kate was saying there about, ultimately the military term is no plan survives contact. And you can have an all singing, all dancing plan, but as soon as the bullets start flying in, an explosion happens, that plan now becomes not viable. But what you do have is your strategy. And that strategy is that long-term goal of how you're going to achieve that. And responding to one of the questions here is, any tips on how to keep strategy front of the mind when the bullets are flying in? And from my experiences, if you have those foundations of training, good culture and good behaviours amongst your employees, your leadership and your managers, then it allows you, again, another military term is that condor moment, because when the business is going around and sort of doing its day-to-day, it enables you to take that step back and have that 5 or 10 minutes that you need to evaluate, look at your plan, replan, and then make sure that your strategy is still viable. And if it's not, how do you need to change it? And then how is that going to trickle down to everyone? So ultimately, to answer that question is take that time out, have that condor moment, and don't just immediately respond, because then what you're into is, again, what Kate has described is that fight, flight, or freeze. So what you want to do is respond with accurate precision and not then just a knee-jerk reaction, which then goes into the type 2. So I'll open it up. I think you're on mute, John.
Still on mute.
I've got it. Thank you very much, Scott. That was quicker than I thought. We've had a couple more in, I think. Yeah. We got there. Will changes in strategy be seen as bad strategy amongst employees or our team?
I don't think so. Kate probably got something to say on this, because I think ultimately, like we said before, it's about understanding that if you do have to change it, change. You don't just stick to it just because that's what you planned at the beginning of the year. Actually, being flexible and realizing that you need to change it because the environment's changed or the circumstances have changed or your team have changed. That's really important to actually address that, because those businesses who don't, for example, when we had lockdown, it kind of goes on to one of the other questions about responding to the environment. If you don't acknowledge that these changes have an impact, that's when you'll start to see a decline in people's mental health, in their motivation, engagement, and it just has a ripple effect. So you may have to change your strategy, but first of all, look at changing that plan. And then if you need to change the strategy, communicate that to the team and explain why. And I think when they know why and they understand, often that really helps to get that message home.
Yeah,
Communicate.
Yeah, that's what I would say. Communicate all the time.
Yeah. You said earlier, it's maintaining that buy-in, isn't it, with the entire person. So I think we're up to Damon next. Thank you very much.
Yeah, there's only just one thing I was going to say. Kate kind of, one of her first slides, I think, had the big words unprecedented, and I think unprecedented is probably the most used word in history over the last 12 months. And my understanding is that most of the audience are going to kind of be around that kind of claims sector. And all I say to you is just to kind of remember those words moving forward. Every client you deal with in a claim situation, that will probably be an unprecedented situation for them. 90% of them, it's an unprecedented situation for them. It's not for you, because you deal with 100 flood claims a day. You deal with 100 fire claims a day. So it's not unprecedented, but it is going to be unprecedented for them. So all I say is moving forward, if you can kind of use, just remember that, how you felt for the last 12 months, how you felt in these unprecedented times, and use that type 2 EQ, philosophies that Kate's espousing in your communications and in the way that you deal with claimants moving forward, and just make sure you've kind of got that bit of empathy and sympathy. Particularly as, in reality, we know we're already in a recession, we're going to be in a recession, and as, again, the claims people on the call will know that there is a correlation between economic downturns and fires occurring in buildings, unfortunately. And there's sometimes a knee-jerk reaction to look at every claim and, is there something we need to look here? Is there a fraud situation? Just can't try and use that kind of unprecedented times and that empathy whenever you're dealing with people, and look to get through that kind of indemnification process as quickly and as painlessly as you can for both parties. And remember how you felt the last 12 months. Well, that's how that person is feeling every day at the moment while they're waiting for that claim to be settled. That's all really from me.
Thank you very much. So I think last but not least, we're over to Jodie.
Yeah, actually, I echo a lot of what everybody else has said. So I'm going to take a slightly different focus and really look at something and pick up on something that Kate said about us actually as leaders opening up and being being vulnerable and actually being accessible and being honest with our emotions, because we can seem like supermen and women as leaders and as though we're almost robots, that nothing affects us. But the reality is, I always find that if you're more vulnerable and open about your own challenges, if you've got a mental health problem, for example, being realistic about that and actually focusing on and leading the whole agenda around self-care and actually really supporting people rather than just powering through, it's not sustainable to behave in that way. And as a leader, you're not leading by example if you actually just kind of force everyone through a really difficult situation. And what I found actually, when you do it in a way that's really authentic, sharing perhaps your own story, or actually just practicing self-care and showing your team that you're going out and having breaks and you're trying to achieve these goals for the team and getting everybody on board. I think it's a collective approach, but we need to set that as an example as leaders. The other thing I'd say is one size doesn't fit all. And I think, again, Kate's mentioned this quite a lot in terms of communication. That's so important because we're not seeing people. I have anxiety and ADHD, and I'm really open about the fact that I communicate differently, I absorb information differently, I react differently, and that can be perceived differently. So, just because it works for one person doesn't mean it'll work for another. And actually, you do need to have that individual discussion with people and not just do it in a group discussion, because often you'll find those people who are struggling more probably won't say anything. So adopting that kind of approach can be really, really helpful. And then the final tip that I had in terms of actually being accountable for your goals is I have an accountability buddy. So as a business owner, I think we don't have anyone that we're accountable to often. So I find that that's really helpful once a week, where we set ourselves some short-term goals and long-term goals, and we look how much or how little we've got towards those and keep each other accountable. And I think that can be really helpful when you're in a leadership team. You might be able to do that internally. As a small business owner, I do it externally, but I do find that that's a really helpful way to keep on track. And then they've changed the slide. Thanks, guys. As you can probably tell, I'm very passionate about mental health and wellbeing, and I want to offer everybody free access to some mental health champion training. Last lockdown, we created our own tech to help our clients and staff, basically reaching them in their homes without having to log into a Zoom call. It's all interactive on a platform. There's a couple of toolkits and guides in there as well. But if anyone wants some free training to help them kind of build their resilience and manage their stress and understand a little bit more about a number of different mental health conditions, then just get in touch on the email and I can arrange for you and your entire team to have free access for the rest of this month. That's it from me.
Excellent. I just had a quick check. I think we've answered all the questions that have been sent in. So I'd like you to thank you for watching today. Absolutely thank all our contributors there. Fantastic work. Nice to have an insight and see that actually in our business we do run. There's a lot of parallels in where we are with where you guys are and where we run. We're in very similar situations. It's you know, a friend of mine's in the fire service and he says it's 90% sitting around and 10% completely manic, and sometimes it seems to be the same with us. So once again, thank you all. Hopefully we can all keep in touch, and if we have anybody today who's viewing has any more questions, then if you can send them to the BDMA, we'll happily pass them on to all our contributors here. So I'm just having a message to kind of everybody stay on, but that'll be fine for our panelists. So once again, for all you who have logged in, taking the time out of your very busy schedules, say thank you very much. Please remember to check out the BDMA website for training and any other forthcoming events, and keep an eye out for all our social media platforms. So I wish you all a very good day and everybody stay safe. Thank you very much.